The bounty on Wade Emmett's head was worth more than most men would earn in 3 lifetimes. But when he saw the woman in the blue calico dress standing at the edge of Challis's dusty Main Street, with tears streaming down her face, all thoughts of running vanished from his mind. It was June of 1878, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small Idaho mining town, nestled in the valley between the jagged peaks of the Salmon River Mountains. Wade had ridden into Challis planning to stay only long enough to water his horse and buy supplies before disappearing into the wilderness again. The Pinkerton men were 3 days behind him, maybe 4 if luck held, and every minute he spent in civilization was a minute closer to the hangman's noose. But there she stood, clutching a letter in her trembling hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight like copper wire and a face that would have been beautiful if not twisted in anguish. Something about the way she held herself, so rigidly proper despite her obvious distress, made Wade pull his buckskin gelding to a stop. "Madam," he said quietly, touching the brim of his weather-beaten hat, "you all right?" She looked up at him with eyes the color of spring grass, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Wade was acutely aware of how he must look after 2 weeks on the trail, dusty, unshaven, with the kind of hard edges that came from sleeping with one hand on a gun. The woman's gaze flickered to the holster at his hip, then back to his face. "I am fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. She turned away quickly, as if embarrassed by her own emotion. Wade should have ridden on. Every instinct he had screamed at him to keep moving, to put as many miles as possible between himself and anyone who might recognize him from the wanted posters. Instead, he swung down from his saddle and took a step closer. That letter bring bad news. She clutched it tighter, the paper crinkling in her fist. "My brother," she whispered. "He was in a mining accident up at the Jerome Creek claim. They say he is hurt badly. They say I should come right away, but I have no way to get there. The stage does not run that route, and I cannot afford to hire a wagon, and even if I could, I would not know how to drive it through those mountain trails." Wade looked down the street toward the livery stable, then back at the woman. The smart thing would be to offer her a few dollars and move on. The very fact that he was considering anything else proved he had gone soft in the head. How far is this claim? 15 miles north, up in the hills. The foreman sent this letter with a freighter who was passing through. She finally met his eyes again, and there was desperation in her gaze. "Please, sir, do you know anyone who might take me? I have a little money, not much, but I can pay something." "What is your name, madam?" "Fiona Osborne. I teach school here in Challis." She said it with a touch of pride that made something tighten in Wade's chest. He glanced over his shoulder at the empty street behind him. No sign of pursuit yet, but they were coming. They were always coming. 15 miles there, 15 miles back. A full day lost, maybe more if her brother was in bad shape. It was foolish. It was dangerous. It was possibly the worst decision he had ever made, and he had made plenty of poor decisions in his 31 years. "My name is Wade," he said, deliberately leaving off his surname. "I will take you." The gratitude that flooded her face made him feel like the biggest fraud in Idaho. She did not know she was putting her faith in a wanted man, an outlaw who had killed 3 marshals in a shootout he had not started but had certainly finished. She saw him as her salvation, when in truth he was probably the most dangerous man she would ever meet. "Thank you," Fiona breathed. "Thank you so much. Let me just get a few things from my room at the boarding house. I will be quick, I promise." Wade nodded and watched her hurry down the wooden sidewalk, her skirts kicking up small clouds of dust. He should leave right now. He should climb back on his horse and ride north alone, let the schoolteacher find someone else to help her. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he knew he would not do it. Maybe it was exhaustion from running, or maybe it was the memory of his own sister who had died young. Whatever the reason, he was committed now. Fiona returned within 10 minutes carrying a small canvas bag and a shawl. Wade helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The buckskin snorted at the extra weight but did not protest. Fiona went rigid in front of him, clearly uncomfortable with the intimate proximity, and Wade did his best to leave as much space between them as the saddle would allow. They rode out of Challis heading north, following the rutted wagon road that paralleled the Salmon River. The mountains rose steeply on either side of the valley, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the summer heat. It was beautiful country, wild and untamed, exactly the kind of place a man could disappear if he was smart about it. For the first mile, they rode in silence. Fiona kept her back ramrod straight, her hands clasped in her lap. Wade could feel the tension radiating from her and finally decided to try conversation. "How long have you been teaching in Challis?" "2 years," she said softly. "I came west from Ohio after my parents died. My brother Peter was already here working the mines. He said there was opportunity in Idaho that we could make a fresh start. It is rough country for a woman alone. I am not alone. I have Peter and I have my students and I have my faith." She paused. "At least I had Peter. If something happens to him, do not think like that. We will get there, and whatever needs doing, we will do it." She turned her head slightly, enough that he could see her profile. "You are very kind to help me, Mr. Wade. Most men would not trouble themselves. If she only knew the truth." Wade said nothing, just urged the buckskin into a faster walk. The sun was lowering toward the western peaks, and he wanted to reach the mine before full dark if possible. They turned off the main road onto a narrower trail that climbed steeply into the hills. The path was barely wide enough for a loaded mule, with drop-offs on one side that made Fiona gasp and lean back against Wade's chest. He steadied her with one arm, his other hand keeping the reins loose and easy. "Is it much farther?" she asked after they had been climbing for over an hour. "I would guess we are about halfway there." The light was fading fast, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yodeled its evening song. Wade kept scanning the trail ahead and behind, looking for any sign of trouble. Not just the Pinkertons now, but also claim jumpers, bandits, hostile Shoshone, who had good reason to resent white intrusions into their territory. The mountains were full of dangers. They reached the Jerome Creek claim just as the last light was draining from the sky. The camp consisted of 4 rough cabins, a larger structure that served as a bunkhouse, and the dark mouth of a mine shaft tunneled into the hillside. Lamplight glowed from one of the cabin windows, and Wade could hear men's voices raised in argument. He helped Fiona down from the horse and tied the buckskin to a hitching rail. Before she could reach the cabin, the door burst open, and a stocky man with a black beard stumbled out, followed by 2 others. "I told you I am done," the bearded man shouted. "That shaft is not safe, and I am not going back in there for any amount of gold. You can find yourself another damn fool." One of the other men grabbed his arm. "You signed on for the season, Hank. You cannot just walk away. Watch me." Hank shook off the grip and stalked toward the far end of camp where the mules were penned. The other 2 men noticed Wade and Fiona then, and their argument died. The taller of the pair stepped forward, squinting in the dim light. "Can I help you folks?" "I am Fiona Osborne," Fiona said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I received word that my brother Peter was injured. Where is he?" The tall man's expression shifted to something like sympathy. "Miss Osborne, we have been expecting you. I am George Talbot, the foreman here. Your brother is in the end cabin yonder. He took a bad fall yesterday when some shoring gave way. Doc Bradley from Challis rode up this morning and set his leg, but—" He hesitated. "It is pretty bad, madam. Doc said he needs to be kept still for at least 6 weeks, maybe more." Fiona pressed a hand to her mouth, then straightened her shoulders. "Take me to him." Talbot led them to the cabin, Wade following a few paces behind. Inside, a young man lay on a narrow cot, his right leg splinted and bandaged. His face was pale and sheened with sweat, and when he saw Fiona, relief flooded his features. "Fee," he rasped. "You came." "Of course I came, you fool." She knelt beside the cot and took his hand, her own trembling. "What were you thinking, working in an unsafe shaft?" "Thinking I could strike it rich and buy you a proper house instead of that dingy boarding room." He tried to smile but winced instead. "Guess I miscalculated." Wade stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder on a private moment. Talbot touched his shoulder and gestured for him to step outside. "Is the brother all you brought up here?" Talbot asked once they were alone. "Because we have got a serious problem and I am not sure what to do about it." "What kind of problem?" "The whole tunnel is unstable. That is why Hank just quit, and I do not blame him. We have already had 2 cave-ins this month, and it is getting worse. There is gold in there, good color, but we need someone who knows about shoring and timber work to make it safe. Most of the crew is talking about walking off the claim, and if they do, we are finished. The investors back in San Francisco will pull out, and everything we have worked for will be lost." Wade kept his face carefully neutral. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you look like a man who has done hard work in hard places. And because Miss Osborne is going to need money if she is going to take care of that brother of hers. 6 weeks minimum before he can walk, probably more like 8 or 10 before he can do any real work. They cannot live on a schoolteacher's salary alone." It was a trap, Wade knew. The moment he stayed longer than a night, he was putting himself at risk. But looking back through the open cabin door at Fiona kneeling beside her injured brother, he found himself saying, "I know some about mine work. Spent time in the California fields back in the 60s. Talbot's face brightened. "Would you be willing to look at the tunnel? Give us your honest assessment. I will pay you a day's wage just for that, and if you think you can fix it, we can talk about regular employment." Every fiber of Wade's being screamed that this was wrong, that he needed to leave now before anyone asked too many questions. But he thought about Fiona's tears on the street in Challis, about her brother lying broken in that cot, about the desperation in her voice when she had said she had no one else. "I will take a look," he heard himself say. "Tomorrow morning, first light." They made camp that night in one of the empty cabins. Fiona stayed with her brother, and Wade bedded down on the floor of the bunkhouse with the remaining miners. He did not sleep much, listening to the night sounds and waiting for the thunder of hoofbeats that would mean his past had caught up with him. Morning came cold and clear, the sun painting the peaks in shades of rose and gold. Wade saddled his horse and rode it down to the creek to drink, his eyes constantly scanning the trail for any sign of riders. Nothing yet. Maybe the Pinkertons had lost his trail. Maybe he had a few more days. After a breakfast of coffee and hardtack, Talbot took Wade into the mine. They carried lanterns that cast wavering shadows on the rough rock walls. The tunnel ran about 200 feet into the hillside before branching into 3 smaller galleries. Even to Wade's inexperienced eye, the problems were obvious. The timber supports were too far apart and poorly anchored, and there were visible cracks in the ceiling rock that spoke of tremendous pressure from above. "This is bad," Wade said flatly. "Whoever planned this shoring did not know what they were doing." You need supports every 6 feet, not every 12, and these cross beams need to be doubled up. Plus, you have got water seepage undermining the foundations here and here. Talbot rubbed his face. Can it be fixed? Maybe. It will take time and a lot of lumber. You will need to shore up the whole main tunnel before you can safely work any of the galleries. We are talking weeks of work, and that is if you can keep enough men on to do the job. What if I told you I would pay you $2 a day plus room and board? And Miss Osborne could stay here too, to be near her brother while he heals. She could cook for the camp, earn a wage of her own. $2 a day was good money, more than most cowboys made in a month. It was also a death sentence if Wade stayed long enough to collect it. But when they emerged from the mine into the bright morning sunlight, the first person Wade saw was Fiona carrying a bucket of water from the creek, her face determined despite the obvious strain, and he knew he was already lost. "All right," he said. "I will do it. But I need at least 4 men who will follow orders and not question the work. And I need the lumber delivered within 3 days." Talbot stuck out his hand and Wade shook it, sealing his fate. The work began the next day. Wade assembled a crew of 4 miners who had not yet quit, including a grizzled Cornishman named Thomas, who actually knew something about tunneling, and a young Irish kid named Patrick, who was stronger than he looked. They started by reinforcing the entrance, installing proper support beams cut from lodgepole pines that grew thick on the mountainside. Fiona did take over the camp cooking, and to Wade's surprise, she was good at it. Meals became something the men actually looked forward to instead of just fuel to keep working. She made sourdough biscuits that were light and fluffy, stews thick with venison and wild onions, even berry cobblers when she could convince someone to pick blackberries from the brambles downstream. Wade found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the way she hummed while she worked, the grace in her movements even when she was doing something as mundane as stirring a pot. She caught him staring once and colored prettily, which only made him want to look at her more. A week passed, then 2. The tunnel work progressed slowly but steadily. Wade fell into a rhythm, work from dawn until dusk, eat Fiona's cooking, sit outside the cabin where Peter was recovering and talk about nothing in particular until the stars came out. He knew he was a fool. Every day he stayed was another day closer to capture. But he could not make himself leave. Peter's leg was healing, though slower than anyone hoped. The young man bore his confinement with surprising good humor, and Wade found himself liking the schoolteacher's brother. Peter had an optimistic streak a mile wide and an endless supply of stories about growing up in Ohio and their adventures traveling west. Fiona wanted to stay back east, Peter told Wade one evening while his sister was cleaning up after supper. She was engaged to a banker's son, had a whole life planned out. But when the fever took our parents, he broke off the engagement, said he had not signed on to marry an orphan with no prospects. Wade's jaw tightened. Sounds like she dodged a bullet there. That is what I told her, but she was heartbroken, gave up everything to come west with me. Sometimes I wonder if she regrets it. Peter's expression grew serious. She deserves better than this rough life, Wade. She deserves a home and security and all the things I keep promising but never seem to provide. She does not strike me as the type who needs someone else to provide for her. She seems pretty capable on her own. Capable, yes, but also lonely. She will not admit it, but I see it in her eyes sometimes. She wants what our parents had, a real partnership, a family. She is just too proud to settle for less. The conversation stayed with Wade long after Peter fell asleep. He found himself thinking about what it would be like to give Fiona those things, to be the kind of man who could offer her stability instead of danger. But that was a fantasy. He was a wanted man. The best thing he could do for her was finish this job and disappear before his past destroyed her future. 3 weeks into the work, Wade's luck ran out. He was in town buying supplies when he saw the poster. His own face stared back at him from the wall of the sheriff's office. Below the words "wanted for murder" and "reward, $5,000. It was an old photograph from his days riding with the Black Creek Gang, before everything went wrong, before the betrayal that had left him wanted for crimes he had not committed. Wade pulled his hat lower and hurried back to his horse, his heart hammering. $5,000. That kind of money would make even honest men think about turning him in. He needed to leave Challis and never come back. But when he tried to convince himself to just keep riding when he reached the turnoff to the mine, he could not do it. He returned to Jerome Creek to find the camp in celebration. Thomas had hit a good vein in the easternmost gallery, high-grade ore that made Talbot's eyes shine with barely contained excitement. The foreman broke out a bottle of whiskey, and even Fiona allowed herself a small glass in honor of the occasion. Wade stood apart from the group, knowing he should feel happy for them, but feeling only a growing sense of dread. His time here was ending. It had to end before someone made the connection between the rough cowboy working the mine and the wanted man on that poster. Later, after the others had wandered off to bed, Fiona found him sitting on a log overlooking the valley. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to read by, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. "You have been quiet tonight," she said, settling beside him without waiting for an invitation. They had grown comfortable with each other over the past weeks, the formal distance of their first meeting replaced by an easy friendship. "I thought you would be pleased about the strike." "I am pleased. It is good luck for everyone here." "But not for you," he glanced at her sharply. Her green eyes studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I do not know what you mean. You are planning to leave soon." It was not a question. "I have seen the way you look at the trail, always watching, always waiting for something. You are running from something, are you not?" Wade could have denied it, but he was tired of lying to her. "Yes." "Will you tell me what?" He should have said no. He should have made up some harmless story about wandering feet and the lure of the horizon. Instead, he found himself telling her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. He told her about riding with the Black Creek Gang in Montana Territory, about thinking they were just cowboys looking for work, but discovering too late they were outlaws. He told her about the night everything went bad, when the gang's leader, a vicious man named Calhoun, decided to rob a stage carrying a federal payroll. Wade had refused to be part of it, had tried to stop it, and in the chaos that followed, 3 marshals died in the crossfire. "I did not kill them," Wade said, staring at his hands as if he could still see blood on them. "But the law does not care about that. Calhoun and the others got away clean, and I was the only one they could identify. So now there is paper on me from here to Montana, and bounty hunters willing to kill me on sight for the reward money." Fiona was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Do you regret trying to stop them?" "No, those marshals had families. They were just doing their job. If I could have prevented their deaths, I would have." "Then you are not the kind of man that poster claims you are. The law does not see it that way." "I am not talking about the law." She shifted closer, her shoulder brushing his. "I am talking about the truth. About the man you actually are, not the crimes they accuse you of. The Wade I know spent weeks of his life helping strangers shore up a dangerous mine. He rode 15 miles out of his way to help a woman he had never met. He sits with my brother every evening and makes him laugh when he is feeling low. That is the man I see." Wade felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he had built to protect himself from exactly this kind of pain. "Fiona, I cannot be what you need me to be. I am a wanted man. Eventually, someone is going to recognize me, and when they do, anyone associated with me will suffer for it. You should stay far away from me. What if I do not want to stay away? Her voice was barely above a whisper. He turned to look at her then, really look at her. Moonlight silvered her hair and cast shadows beneath her cheekbones. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was brave and kind and everything good that he was not. He wanted to kiss her so badly it hurt. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers slender and warm against his calloused palm. These past weeks, working beside you, talking with you, I have felt more alive than I have in years. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me feel safe, even though by all rights you should be the most dangerous thing in my life. I am the most dangerous thing in your life, Wade said roughly. That is not romance talking, Fiona. That is fact. Then why does being near you feel like the safest I have ever been? He had no answer for that. She leaned in slowly, giving him time to pull away, but he was not that strong. When her lips touched his, soft and tentative and perfect, Wade knew he was completely and utterly lost. He kissed her back with all the longing he had been suppressing for weeks, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb stroking along her jawline. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fiona rested her forehead against his. "Stay," she whispered. "Please. We will figure it out somehow. I cannot ask you to take that risk. You are not asking. I am choosing." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Wade, I watched you risk your own safety every day to protect my brother and everyone else at this camp. You work yourself to exhaustion to make sure no one else gets hurt. You are a good man, no matter what some piece of paper says. And I am not going to let you ride off into the wilderness alone because you think that is what is best for me. I am a grown woman and I can make my own decisions." It was the worst possible decision she could make, and they both knew it. But Wade found himself nodding, found himself pulling her close and holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. For that moment, under the vast Idaho sky, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make this work. The next morning, reality came crashing back. Wade was hauling timber at the mine entrance when he heard horses approaching on the trail. 3 riders, moving at a steady pace. He froze, his hand instinctively dropping to the gun at his hip. They were not Pinkertons. The lead rider was wearing a sheriff's star, and the 2 men flanking him had the hard-bitten look of professional bounty hunters. Wade's mind raced through his options. He could run, but that would only confirm his guilt and bring trouble down on the camp. He could fight, but that would likely end with someone dead, maybe Fiona or Peter caught in the crossfire. Or he could stay and face whatever came, trust that somehow things would work out. The sheriff reined in his horse and nodded politely to Talbot, who had come out of his cabin to see what the commotion was about. "Morning. Name is Sheriff Dalton from Challis. Looking for a man might be working up this way. Goes by Wade, tall fellow with dark hair and a scar on his left hand." Wade's heart sank. The scar was from a knife fight years ago, distinctive enough to identify him even if his face was covered. There was no point in denying it now. He stepped forward, his hands carefully visible and away from his weapon. "That would be me, Sheriff." Dalton's eyes narrowed. "Wade Emmett." "Yes, sir." The bounty hunters tensed, hands moving toward their guns. Fiona appeared in the doorway of the cook cabin, her face going white when she saw what was happening. Wade wanted to tell her to stay back, to not get involved, but he knew it would do no good. "I am going to need you to come with me, Mr. Emmett," Dalton said. "There is paper on you out of Montana territory, murder charges. I know about the charges. I did not kill those marshals. That is for a judge to decide, not me. Now you can come peacefully, or we can do this the hard way." "Your choice." Wade's mind raced. If he went with them, he would be transported back to Montana, tried for murders he did not commit, and almost certainly hanged. The witnesses who could exonerate him were all dead or disappeared, and no jury would believe an outlaw's word over documented evidence, even if that evidence was falsified. But if he resisted, people here would get hurt. Fiona would get hurt. That was unacceptable. He started to reach for his gun belt to unbuckle it when Fiona's voice rang out across the camp. "Wait, please, you have to listen to me." Dalton turned to her, his expression more patient than Wade expected. "Madam, this does not concern you. Best stay out of it. It absolutely concerns me." She marched forward, her fear giving way to righteous anger. "This man saved my life and my brother's life. He has spent the last month making this mine safe so good men would not die in cave-ins. If he is a murderer, then I am the Queen of England. I appreciate your loyalty, miss, but the law is the law. There are witnesses who say he was part of the gang that killed 3 federal marshals. Then those witnesses are lying." Fiona positioned herself between Wade and the sheriff, her small frame vibrating with intensity. "I do not care what some piece of paper says. I know this man. I know his character. He is not a killer." One of the bounty hunters snorted. "Lady, you have known him a few weeks. We have been tracking Wade Emmett for 3 years. He is an outlaw and a murderer, and all the pretty speeches in the world will not change that." Wade put a hand on Fiona's shoulder. "It is all right. Let me go with them. Maybe at trial the truth will come out." She spun to face him, tears streaming down her face. "You know that is not true. You told me yourself there were no other witnesses. They will hang you for crimes you did not commit, and I will not let that happen. I will not. You do not have a choice." "Yes, I do." She turned back to Dalton. "What if I could prove he was somewhere else when those marshals were killed?" "Would that be enough?" The sheriff frowned. "Do you have that kind of proof?" "No, but I could find it. Give me time. Give us time to track down someone who can testify that Wade was not in Montana when the robbery happened." "Miss, even if I wanted to, I cannot just let a wanted man walk free on the hope you might find a witness. That is not how the law works." Wade could see the desperation building in Fiona's eyes, and his heart broke for her. She was trying to save him, but there was nothing to be done. The past had caught up with him, just like he always knew it would. Then Talbot spoke up, his voice carrying across the camp. "Sheriff, what if we took responsibility for him? Keep him here at the camp under supervision while the lady does her investigating. We are 2 weeks from finishing crucial work on this mine, and if Wade leaves now, the whole operation could collapse. That would put 20 men out of work and bankrupt the investors. Give us those 2 weeks, and we will make sure he does not run. You have my word as foreman, and I will put up a bond of $1,000 as guarantee." Dalton looked dubious. "That is highly irregular." "So is hanging an innocent man," Talbot said flatly. "Look, I have been watching Wade work for nearly a month now. If he is such a dangerous criminal, why has he been breaking his back to keep my men safe? Why has he stayed when he could have run a dozen times? Maybe there is more to this story than what is written on that warrant." The sheriff chewed on his mustache, clearly torn. The bounty hunters were muttering angrily, no doubt calculating how much of their reward money was slipping away. Finally, Dalton sighed. 2 weeks. But he does not leave this camp for any reason, and someone is watching him at all times. "If he runs, Mr. Talbot, you lose your bond and face charges for aiding a fugitive. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear." Dalton looked at Wade. "Do I have your word you will not try to escape?" Wade wanted to say no, wanted to tell them all to go to hell and make a break for it. But Fiona was looking at him with such hope in her eyes, and Talbot had just risked everything to give him a chance. He could not betray that trust. "You have my word. I will stay." The bounty hunters protested loudly, but Dalton shut them down with a sharp gesture. "That is my decision. You boys want to wait around for 2 weeks on the chance he runs. That is your business. Otherwise, move along." They moved along, though not without plenty of dark looks and muttered threats. Dalton stayed long enough to take down Wade's formal statement about the events in Montana, then rode back toward Challis with a promise to return in exactly 14 days. When the dust from their departure had settled, Wade turned to Talbot. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did. You saved my operation, probably saved lives. I am not going to see you railroaded for something you did not do." He clapped Wade on the shoulder. "Besides, Miss Osborne would have skinned me alive if I let them take you." Fiona stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, still trembling from the confrontation. Wade went to her and pulled her into his embrace, not caring who saw. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "But you know this does not change anything. In 2 weeks, unless you can work a miracle, I will be on my way to a noose. Then we have 2 weeks to find that miracle." She pulled back and wiped her eyes, her jaw set with determination. "Tell me everything you remember about that night. Every detail, every person who might have seen you before or after the robbery. There has to be someone who can prove you were not there." They spent the rest of the day going over Wade's memories of that terrible night in Montana. He had been in a town called Red Lodge, drinking in a saloon and trying to figure out how to extricate himself from Calhoun's gang. The robbery had happened 20 miles away, near Billings. Wade had not even known about it until the next morning when he rode back to camp and found it deserted, with wanted posters already going up. "There must have been people in that saloon who saw you," Fiona insisted. "A bartender, other patrons, someone who could swear you were there all night." "That was 3 years ago. Even if I could remember their names, which I cannot, what are the odds they would still be around? Or that they would remember one cowboy drinking alone in a corner? It is still a chance." Fiona grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil from her school supplies and started making a list. "Red Lodge. The saloon, you said it was called the Silver Dollar. We need to send telegrams, make inquiries. There has to be a trail, Wade. There has to be." He wanted to believe her, but he had spent 3 years running because he knew the truth. The world did not care about justice when a scapegoat was convenient. Still, watching her work, seeing the fierce determination in her eyes, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. It was dangerous and probably foolish, but it was there nonetheless. That night, Peter cornered Wade outside the cabin. The young man was walking with a crutch now, his leg healing well enough for short distances. "My sister is risking everything for you," Peter said without preamble. "Her reputation, her job, maybe her freedom if they decide to charge her with obstruction. She has never done anything like this before, never defied authority or bent the rules. You must know what that means. It means I should have left before I dragged her into my mess." "No." Peter shook his head. "It means she loves you, you idiot, and unless I am completely blind, you love her too." Wade did not bother denying it. "That does not change the facts. In 2 weeks, I will either be cleared of charges that are 3 years old, which is about as likely as striking gold in a dried-up creek bed, or I will hang. Either way, I have nothing to offer her. You could offer her the truth. Tell her how you feel. What good would that do, except make things harder when we have to say goodbye?" Peter leaned heavily on his crutch, wincing as he adjusted his weight. "My sister spent 2 years engaged to a man who never once told her he loved her. Not once. He called her practical and suitable, like she was a piece of furniture he was purchasing. Then when our parents died, he dropped her without a second thought. Do you know what that did to her? It made her believe she was not worth loving for herself, only for what she could provide. "She is worth everything," Wade said fiercely. "She is the best person I have ever met." Then tell her that. Do not let her go through this fight thinking she is alone, or worse, thinking you do not feel the same way she does. She deserves better than that. She deserves the truth, even if the truth is hard. Wade looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched over him during 3 years of running, hiding, surviving. Peter was right. Fiona deserved the truth, deserved to know that she was not alone in this feeling that had grown between them like wildflowers after rain. He found her in the cook cabin, still bent over her papers, writing letter after letter to officials in Montana, to sheriffs in neighboring counties, to anyone who might have information. Her hair had escaped its pins and fell in copper waves around her shoulders, and there was an ink smudge on her cheek where she had rubbed it absently. "You should rest," Wade said softly from the doorway. She looked up, startled, then smiled wearily. "I will rest when we have answers. I have drafted telegrams to 3 different sheriffs, the territorial marshal's office, and the owner of the Silver Dollar Saloon, assuming it still exists. Tomorrow, I will ride into Challis and send them all. Fiona." He crossed the room and took the pencil from her hand, setting it aside. "You do not have to do this." "Yes, I do." "Why? Why risk everything for a man you barely know, a man who is probably going to hang no matter what you find?" She stood to face him, her green eyes blazing. "Because you are not that man. Because I know in my bones that you are innocent. And because she faltered, some of her fierce certainty giving way to vulnerability. "Because I care about you, Wade, more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I care about you too. More than I should, more than is wise. You have become my whole world in the space of a month, and that terrifies me because I cannot protect you from what is coming. I do not need you to protect me. I need you to trust me. Trust that we can find the truth together. Even if we do, even if by some miracle we clear my name, I am still just a broke cowboy with no prospects and a past full of mistakes. You deserve better than that. Stop telling me what I deserve." She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "Let me decide what I want. Let me choose you." Wade knew he should argue, should push her away for her own good. Instead, he kissed her again, deeper and more desperate than the night before. She responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing against his. For a few precious moments, nothing existed but the two of them and this incredible, impossible thing growing between them. When they finally broke apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I know I have no right to say it, and I know it does not change anything, but you deserve to know the truth. I love you, Fiona Osborne. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and whatever happens in 2 weeks, I need you to know that." Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. "I love you too, and we are going to prove your innocence, Wade. We are going to find a way through this, I promise." It was a promise she had no way to keep, but in that moment Wade chose to believe her. The next morning, Fiona rode down to Challis accompanied by Talbot, who wanted to check on supply shipments. Wade watched them go with a knot of anxiety in his gut. He did not like her being away from the camp, exposed to questions and gossip. The whole town would have heard by now that a wanted man was working at Jerome Creek, and some people would not be kind about Fiona's involvement. He threw himself into work to keep from worrying, helping Thomas and Patrick install the last of the main tunnel supports. The Cornishman whistled while he worked, clearly pleased with how solid the structure was becoming. "This will hold for decades," Thomas said approvingly, running a hand along one of the cross beams. You have got a real gift for this, Wade. Ever think about making it a regular trade? Hard to plan for the future when you are not sure you have one. The lady will come through. I have seen her type before back in Cornwall. Women with fire in their blood and steel in their spines. When they set their mind to something, heaven and earth move to make it happen. Wade hoped he was right, but hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed. Fiona returned late that afternoon, exhausted but triumphant. She had sent all the telegrams and even convinced the territorial marshal's office to review the case file. It was not much, but it was something. The marshal's clerk said they would send whatever records they have, Fiona reported as she and Wade walked along the creek in the evening light. It might take a week or more to arrive, but at least they are looking into it. You are amazing, Wade said quietly. I do not think I have ever met anyone as determined as you. I am fighting for what matters. She slipped her hand into his, and they walked in comfortable silence for a while. The creek burbled over smooth stones, and somewhere a meadowlark sang its descending trill. It was peaceful and perfect, and Wade wished he could freeze this moment forever. The days blurred together after that. Wade worked on the mine during the day, and in the evenings, he and Fiona would review any responses to her inquiries. The replies came slowly, most of them unhelpful. The Silver Dollar Saloon had burned down 2 years ago, and the owner had moved to California. The sheriff in Red Lodge had changed 3 times since the night in question, and no one seemed to have records going back that far. The territorial marshal sent a copy of the case file, but it contained nothing new, just the same accusations Wade already knew about. With 4 days left before Sheriff Dalton was due to return, Wade's hope was fading fast. He lay awake at night in the bunkhouse, staring at the ceiling and trying to accept that this was how his story would end. Not in a blaze of glory, but on a scaffold, paying for crimes he did not commit while the real killers walked free. Then, on the 12th day, everything changed. Fiona was in the cook cabin preparing supper when a rider came thundering up the trail. Wade recognized him as Billy, the teenage son of one of the merchants in Challis. The boy was red-faced and gasping for breath. Miss Osborne, there is a telegram for you. Just came in on the wire." Fiona dropped the wooden spoon she was holding and ran outside, Wade close behind her. She took the telegram with shaking hands and read it once, twice, her eyes going wide. "What is it?" Wade demanded. She looked up at him, and there were tears streaming down her face, but she was laughing. "It is from a woman named Margaret Sullivan in Helena. She says she was working as a barmaid at the Silver Dollar the night of the robbery. She remembers you because you tipped her a whole $1 for coffee, and she had never gotten a tip that big before. She is willing to testify that you were in Red Lodge all evening and did not leave until the next morning. Wade, she can prove you were not there." For a moment, Wade could not process what he was hearing. 3 years of running, 3 years of looking over his shoulder, and salvation came in the form of a barmaid who remembered a generous tip. "Are you sure?" "She is certain she has the right night. She says she is certain." Apparently, the robbery made big news, and she remembers the date clearly because it was her daughter's birthday, and she used your tip money to buy her a present. She has been living in Helena since the saloon burned, and she only saw my telegram because the territorial marshal's office forwarded it to all the major towns in Montana. Wade pulled Fiona into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. The other miners heard the commotion and came running, and soon the whole camp was celebrating. "We need to get her here before Dalton comes back," Talbot said practically. "Can she travel?" "The telegram says she is willing to come if we can pay for the stage fare," Fiona said. "It will take her at least 3 days to reach Challis from Helena." "I will wire the money today," Talbot said, "and send a message to Sheriff Dalton about the delay. This changes everything." It did change everything. For the first time in 3 years, Wade allowed himself to think about a future that extended beyond the next day, the next town, the next desperate escape. He thought about staying in one place, maybe buying a small ranch, building a home. He thought about Fiona, about the possibility of a life with her that was not overshadowed by the threat of the gallows. Margaret Sullivan arrived in Challis on the 15th day, a plump, motherly woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Sheriff Dalton rode up to Jerome Creek with her, along with the territorial marshal himself, a stern-faced man named Hendricks, who clearly did not appreciate having to travel all this way for a case he had considered closed. They assembled in Talbot's cabin, which was the only space large enough for everyone. Margaret took one look at Wade and nodded firmly. "That is him. I never forget a face, and I definitely never forget a man who tips $1 for a cup of coffee. He was in my saloon from about 7 in the evening until past midnight. I remember because he kept ordering coffee and looking like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders." "And you are certain this was July 14th, 1875? Hendricks asked. "Certain as sunrise. Like I said in my telegram, it was my daughter's birthday, and the next day the whole town was buzzing about that payroll robbery. The timing stuck in my head because I remember thinking how lucky I was to have gotten that tip the day before, when money was tight." Hendricks consulted his papers. The robbery took place at approximately 8:30 in the evening, 20 miles from Red Lodge. Even if Mr. Emmett had left immediately after, he could not have reached the location in time to participate. "Which is what I have been trying to tell people for 3 years, Wade said. "I was not there. I was drinking bad coffee and trying to figure out how to get away from Calhoun and his gang without ending up dead." The marshal studied him for a long moment. "Why did you not come forward with this information when the charges were first filed?" "Because by the time I knew about the charges, Calhoun had spread word that I was the one who betrayed them. There was paper on me and a price on my head, and I figured no one would believe me anyway, so I ran. Running made you look guilty. Running kept me alive." Hendricks nodded slowly. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you willing to swear to this testimony in an official hearing?" "I will swear on a stack of Bibles if that is what it takes. That boy is innocent, and I will not see him hang for something he did not do." It took another 3 days to arrange the official hearing, but in the end, the result was inevitable. With Margaret's testimony and the timeline that made Wade's participation impossible, the territorial marshal had no choice but to drop all charges. The document declaring Wade Emmett a free man, with all accusations dismissed, was signed on a bright August morning in the Challis courthouse. Wade walked out of that courthouse into the brilliant Idaho sunshine, feeling like he was learning to breathe for the first time in years. Fiona was waiting for him on the steps, and when she saw his face, she burst into tears. "It is over," Wade said, pulling her close. "It is finally over." "What will you do now?" she asked against his chest. "Well, I thought I might ask a beautiful schoolteacher if she would consider marrying a poor but recently exonerated cowboy, assuming she is interested in that sort of thing." Fiona pulled back to look at him, her tear-streaked face radiating joy. "I might be interested. But only if that cowboy is prepared to settle down and stay in one place. I have spent 3 years running. I am ready to stand still, especially if it means standing beside you." She kissed him there on the courthouse steps in front of half the town of Challis, and Wade did not care who saw or what they thought. He had his freedom back, and more importantly, he had found the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Challis. Peter stood up as Wade's best man, still using a crutch but healing well. Margaret Sullivan stayed for the wedding, declaring she would not miss it for the world. Talbot and all the miners from Jerome Creek attended, along with most of the town, curious to see the wanted man who had been declared innocent. The mine continued to produce good ore, and Talbot offered Wade a permanent position as mine supervisor. It was steady work with decent pay, enough to rent a small house in town and start building a real life. Fiona continued teaching, though she had to endure plenty of gossip about her unorthodox courtship with a former outlaw. She bore it with grace and humor, telling anyone who would listen that she had always known Wade was innocent, and that love was worth fighting for. Their first winter together was hard but happy. The Idaho mountains piled high with snow, and the passes became impassable until spring. Wade worked in the mine and came home each night to a warm house and a wife who looked at him like he hung the moon. They spent long evenings talking, reading, planning for the future. Fiona wanted a real home of their own, not a rental. Wade wanted to try raising horses. They both wanted children, lots of them, filling the house with laughter and chaos. Spring came in a rush of snowmelt and wildflowers, and with it came opportunity. One of the ranchers north of Challis was selling out and moving to Oregon. The property was not large, only 80 acres, but it had good water, decent grazing, and a sturdy cabin that needed work but had good bones. Wade and Fiona rode out to look at it on a bright April morning, the mountains still capped with snow but the valley floor turning green. "We could build onto the cabin," Fiona said, walking the property with a critical eye. "Add a proper kitchen and maybe a second bedroom. The barn needs a new roof, but the frame is solid." "It would take every penny we have saved," Wade warned, "and then some. We would be living on beans and hope for at least a year. We have lived on less." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "Let us do it, Wade. Let us build something that is ours." They bought the property and threw themselves into the work of making it a real home. Wade quit his job at the mine to focus on the ranch, raising horses and running a small herd of cattle. Fiona continued teaching during the school year, riding the 6 miles into town and back each day on a gentle mare Wade trained for her. They worked from dawn until dusk and fell into bed each night exhausted but content. Peter, whose leg had healed though it left him with a permanent limp, decided to try his luck in the gold fields of Nevada. He left in late summer, promising to write and visit when he could. Fiona cried when he rode away, but she understood his need to find his own path. Wade admired the younger man's courage, heading out into the world to make his fortune despite the setback of his injury. Their first child was born the following spring, a squalling baby boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Samuel, and Wade held his son with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility and love. Fiona recovered quickly from the birth, tended by a midwife from town and by Wade, who hovered anxiously until she shooed him out to do his chores. Life settled into a rhythm. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Wade developed a reputation for training good horses, and buyers came from as far as Boise to purchase his stock. Fiona gave up teaching after Samuel was born, finding that running the household and helping with the ranch took all her time and energy. She did not mind. She had found her place, and it was beside Wade, building something together. 2 years after Samuel came a daughter, Emma, with copper hair like her mother and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Then 2 years after that, another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but watched everything with thoughtful eyes. The years passed, marked by the seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Wade woke each morning still marveling that this was his life, that he had a wife who loved him and children who called him Papa, and a place to belong. Sometimes, he still had nightmares about his years on the run, about the marshals dying and the rope waiting for him. But Fiona would hold him in the dark and remind him that those days were over, that he was free, that they had built this life together, and no one could take it away. Peter visited occasionally, his letters always full of wild stories about mining camps and cattle drives and the strange characters he met in his travels. He never struck it rich, but he seemed happy in his wandering life, and that was what mattered. He always brought presents for his nieces and nephews, and they adored their Uncle Peter with his tall tales and his easy laugh. Margaret Sullivan wrote regularly, keeping them updated on her life in Helena. She had remarried to a widowed shopkeeper with 3 children of his own and seemed content. She always signed her letters with "Your friend in faith," and Fiona treasured every one. When Samuel was 10, Emma 8, and James 6, tragedy struck the neighboring ranch when both parents died in a winter storm. Their 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, were left orphaned with no relatives willing to take them. Wade and Fiona did not hesitate. They opened their home and their hearts, adopting all 3 children and expanding their family overnight. It meant tighter quarters and stretched resources, but Wade and Fiona had both known what it was like to be alone in the world, and they could not let those children face that fate. The years continued to roll by. Wade's hair started to show gray at the temples, and Fiona developed fine lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun and laughing at her children's antics. The ranch prospered. Their children grew strong and capable, learning to ride and rope and work alongside their parents. Samuel showed a talent for handling horses that rivaled his father's. Emma had her mother's way with words and dreamed of becoming a teacher herself one day. James turned out to have a gift for numbers and kept the ranch accounts with meticulous care. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Wade and Fiona rode up into the mountains on a warm August day, leaving the children in charge of the ranch for a few hours. They found a meadow filled with wildflowers, the same colors Fiona had carried in her wedding bouquet all those years ago. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked as they sat on a fallen log, looking out over the valley. "You could have had an easier life, married someone without all my complications." Fiona laughed and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Wade Emmett, you have asked me some version of that question at least once a year for 2 decades, and my answer has never changed. You are the best decision I ever made, you and the life we built together." "I gave up my freedom that day in the courthouse," Wade said quietly. "Gave up the open road and the wild places. Some days I think about what it was like, having nothing tying me down, being able to ride off whenever the mood struck." Fiona turned to him with a raised eyebrow. "Are you saying you miss being a fugitive?" "No." He smiled and brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "I am saying that I used to think freedom meant having nothing to lose, no ties, no responsibilities, but I was wrong. Real freedom is having something worth staying for, worth fighting for. Loving you, building this life with you, that is the greatest liberty I have ever known. I would trade everything else 10 times over for what we have." Tears shimmered in Fiona's eyes. "That might be the most romantic thing you have ever said to me. I have had 20 years to work on it." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. Their valley now, their home, their life. Wade thought about the desperate man he had been, wanted for crimes he did not commit, running from a past he could not escape. He thought about the schoolteacher with tears on her face who had asked a stranger for help. And he thought about how one moment of compassion had changed everything, had led him to this meadow, This woman, this life that was richer than any gold strike. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they rode home together, side by side, the way they had ridden for 20 years and would ride for all the years to come. The ranch spread out before them in the gathering dusk, lights beginning to glow in the windows as their children prepared supper. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Wade could hear laughter carrying on the evening breeze. This was freedom. This was home. This was everything he had never known he was searching for during those long years of running. And it had all started with a choice, a moment when he decided to stop and help someone in need instead of riding past. That single decision had led to everything else: love, family, belonging, purpose. The years continued in their gentle rhythm. Wade taught his sons and adopted son the things his own father had taught him, before the war and bad choices had torn his family apart. He taught them to work hard, to keep their word, to treat others with respect. He taught them that a man was measured not by his mistakes, but by how he faced them, what he did to make things right. Fiona taught their daughters and adopted daughters to be strong, to speak their minds, to never settle for less than they deserved. She taught them that love was not something passive, not something you waited around hoping to find. It was something you chose, something you fought for, something you built one day at a time. Samuel grew into a fine young man and fell in love with the daughter of a rancher from the next valley. They married when he was 22, and Wade stood up with his son, remembering his own wedding day and the promise he had made to build a life worth living. Emma did become a teacher, taking over the schoolhouse in Challis when the previous teacher retired. She was fierce and loving with her students, just like her mother. James took over much of the ranch management as Wade grew older, his careful mind and steady hand perfect for the work. The 3 adopted children thrived as well, growing up to lead good lives of their own. They never forgot what Wade and Fiona had done for them. Never forgot that when the world had turned its back, this couple had opened their home without hesitation. Grandchildren started arriving, filling the ranch house with noise and joy. Wade bounced babies on his knee and told them stories about the old days, carefully edited to remove the parts about being wanted by the law. Fiona baked pies and sewed little dresses and dandled grandbabies with the same patience and love she had shown her own children. Wade's hair turned completely gray, then white. His hands grew gnarled from decades of rope work and labor, but they were still strong. Fiona developed arthritis in her knees, and she moved a little slower, but her mind stayed sharp and her humor never faded. They grew old together, side by side, exactly as they had promised on their wedding day. On a cool October evening, when Wade was 62 and Fiona 60, they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Their children and grandchildren were gathered for Sunday supper, filling the house with conversation and laughter. Someone was playing a fiddle inside, and small feet thundered across the floor as the youngest grandchildren danced. "We did all right, didn't we?" Fiona said softly, her hand in Wade's. "Better than all right." He squeezed her fingers gently. "We built something good, something lasting. Our children have good lives, good families. The ranch is thriving. This is more than I ever dreamed of having. Do you remember that day in Challis? When I was crying over Peter's letter and you stopped to help? I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even with tears on your face." She laughed. "Liar. You thought I was a nuisance. Maybe for about 5 seconds. Then I just thought you needed help and I happened to be there." He turned to look at her, this woman who had fought for him, believed in him, built a life with him. "I am glad I stopped. I am glad I took that chance. Everything good in my life came from that one decision." Everything good in my life came from being brave enough to ask a stranger for help, from trusting my instincts about you." She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "I love you, Wade Emmett. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Fiona Emmett. Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life, the greatest freedom. I told you once that giving up my old life felt like giving up my freedom, but it was the opposite. You gave me freedom I never had before. Freedom from running, from hiding, from being alone. Freedom to just be myself, to build something, to belong somewhere." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over them on their wedding night, on the births of their children, through all the joys and sorrows of their life together. Inside the house, someone called that supper was ready, and the family began to gather around the long table Wade had built with his own hands. "Shall we go in?" Fiona asked. "In a minute." Wade wanted to hold onto this moment a little longer, this perfect crystallization of a life well lived. "I just want to sit here with you a bit more. We have all the time in the world." And they did. They had built it together, one day at a time, one choice at a time. From that first moment in Challis, when a wanted man stopped to help a desperate woman, through the fight to clear his name, through years of building and growing and loving, they had created something beautiful, something lasting. The sun finished its descent, leaving the sky awash in purple and deep blue. The first stars winked into existence. From inside the house came the sounds of family, of home, of everything that mattered. Wade stood and offered his hand to his wife, helping her up from the chair. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she said, smiling up at him with the same light in her eyes that he had seen that first day and every day since. They walked inside together, into the warmth and light, into the life they had chosen, fought for, and built together. Hand in hand, the way they had always been, the way they always would be. A wanted man and a schoolteacher who had taken a chance on each other, who had fought for love and won, who had discovered that true freedom was not found in running away, but in running toward something, toward someone, toward a life filled with purpose and meaning and love. Behind them, the door swung closed, shutting out the darkness. Inside, their family waited, the legacy of that single decision to stop and help, to care, to choose love over fear. And in that warm, bright space, surrounded by the people they had created and the life they had built, Wade and Fiona took their places at the head of the table, together as always, exactly where they belonged. The years had been kind to them, the future stretched bright before their children and grandchildren, and the past with all its pain and fear had become just a story, a testament to how far they had come. Wade looked around the table at the faces of his family, and he knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every trial, every moment of doubt had been worth it. This was his legacy. Not the years on the run, not the wanted posters, not the crimes he had been accused of. This was what he would leave behind. A family who loved each other, a ranch that would continue for generations, and the memory of a man who had found redemption in love, who had discovered that the greatest freedom was not in having nothing to lose, but in having everything to fight for. And beside him, always beside him, was the woman who had made it all possible. Fiona, who had seen past the wanted posters to the man beneath, who had fought for his innocence when the whole world was ready to condemn him, who had chosen him every single day for over 30 years. She was his freedom, his home, his greatest adventure. As the family joined hands for grace, Wade's fingers closed around Fiona's, familiar and comfortable and absolutely right. Samuel, now with silver threading his own hair, offered the prayer, thanking God for family, for blessings, for love that endured all things. And Wade added his own silent prayer of gratitude for the day a wanted man had stopped to help a crying woman, and how that single moment of compassion had changed 2 lives forever. The food was passed, conversation flowed, grandchildren laughed, and life continued in all its beautiful, messy, wonderful complexity. This was the happy ending they had earned, the reward for their courage and faith. This was what it meant to truly live, not just survive. And Wade Emmett, former fugitive, current rancher, father, grandfather, and devoted husband, knew without a shadow of doubt that he was the luckiest man who had ever lived. He caught Fiona's eye across the table and smiled, and she smiled back, that special smile that was just for him, full of love and shared history and the knowledge that they had done it. They had built this life together against all odds. In that smile was everything: the past they had overcome, the present they were living, and the future that would continue long after they were gone, in the faces and lives of their children and grandchildren. This was freedom. This was love. This was everything that mattered. And it had all started with a simple choice to stop running and start living, to help someone in need, to believe in love even when the world said it was impossible. Wade had given up his wandering ways, his life on the run, his so-called freedom. And in return, he had gained something infinitely more valuable: a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and the knowledge that loving Fiona Osborne was indeed the greatest liberty he had ever known.